Hello, friends. It's Phil Grant with Baird and Warner in Crystal Lake, welcoming you to another edition of the Real Estate Minute. This is, of course, where we talk about all things real estate: buying, selling, leasing, commercial properties, residential properties, really in the hopes of helping you to make a better, more informed decision when real estate matters come up in your world. We hope this somewhat cloudy May day finds you and your loved ones safe and healthy and well. As we approach the Memorial Day weekend, obviously, we want to take time to give thanks to all of those who have served our country that have kept us safe for all these years. So that's, I think, a very important thing. If you were with us last week, we began a brief discussion about transaction known as a sale and leaseback. And again, quite simply, that's exactly what it is. You have an entity that has a piece of property that they want to sell, but they want to retain possession of that property, either some of it or all of it. Last week, we looked at the advantages for both the buyer and the seller, and we'll run through those to recap real briefly here. Today, we're going to talk about some of the things that both the buyer and the seller need to be careful of, which could become disadvantages. So if we think about the seller or going to be the new tenant, what are the advantages? Again, real briefly. Obviously, when they sell, they're going to be able to remove any debt that remains on the property, so that's a good thing for them. They are going to retain possession, again, of all or some of the property so that they can continue to operate their business out of it. So that's a good thing for them. And there could be tax advantages for the seller as well. If we look at the buyer, one of the advantages for the buyer is they are going to be able to structure that lease to get the ROI or return on investment that they want. So that's a good thing for them. And speaking of the lease, that is generally speaking going to be a triple net lease, which simply means that the seller, now tenant, is going to be responsible for taxes, maintenance, and insurance. So that's a good thing, again, for the buyer. It's kind of a hedge against market swings, too, because what we're doing is we're locking that seller, now the tenant, into that lease and at the prevailing rate. And if the prevailing rate starts to go down, again, that seller tenant now is going to be locked in. So again, that's a plus for the buyer of the property. And there could be tax advantages again for the buyer of the property through depreciation or investment tax credits if they're available. And so that's going to help to offset any income that's gained from the lease. So those are kind of the pluses for both the buyer and the seller. Now, if we look at the disadvantages for the seller, obviously they have no ownership interest in the property anymore. So that could very well be a disadvantage. And at the end of the lease, they're going to have to make a decision. Do they ask for an extension on that lease, and then that has to be negotiated? Or do they find a different place to operate their business from? So those are some things that the seller has to keep in mind. Again, just the inverse of the plus for the buyer is a disadvantage for the seller, now the tenant, because again, if the market decreases, as we talked about a minute ago, they are still locked into that lease that they signed, and so they could very well be paying above market rent, although I think these days the chances of that happening are probably not very good. Could be tax disadvantages too for the seller. If they have been there a long time in that particular property and the basis is less than its current value, the seller tenant might have to pay higher taxes on the actual sale transaction that's involved. So if we look at the things that the buyer wants to look out for, number one, obviously, is if the seller defaults on the lease. Then that puts the new owner of the property in a predicament where they're going to have to figure that out one way or the other, or get a new tenant involved. So that's one of the things that they're going to want to look out for. And of course, the new owner has to supervise that property as well. We want to make sure that all aspects of that triple net lease are being handled appropriately. And we also want to make sure that there is no waste on the property that could come into play. So again, sale and leaseback, common in the commercial world, generally speaking, a very good thing for both the buyer and the seller. Yes, there are things that need to be looked after, but generally speaking, again, a very good thing. If you need help with commercial or residential property, reach out to the old problem solver at 773-814-5369. And I do want to mention that this information comes from an article by an attorney by the name of Robert D. Mitchell. He is with the firm of Tiffany and Bosco, so we thank him very much for this informative article. I do hope that you found it informative. And again, if you've got any issues that you need help with from a real estate standpoint, give me a call. I'll be happy to sit down and talk with you. Thanks very much for taking a minute to watch. We hope that you have a great day and again, a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.